The Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant, or PORTS, was a massive fixture on America's front lines.
In the production of uranium-235 for military use.
For nearly 5 decades, PORTS processed uranium, critical to making America's nuclear bombs and fueling its nuclear navy. Now closed and partially dismantled, PORTS is ground zero for claims of radioactive contamination.
I mean, the risk is here.
In nearby communities, now riddled with rare cancers.
We've got, alarming cancer rates
that are killing children.
That was my best friend, and my son.
The U.S. Department of Energy, or DOE, which oversees PORTS, insists radiation around the plant is at safe levels. But some radioactive particles in the air here are not uranium that you'd expect to find, but something much more deadly.
The chemical and radiological toxicity associated with plutonium is many, many times worse than uranium.
In this 2019 report, Dr. Michael Ketterer at Northern Arizona University announced he found plutonium isotopes in sediment and dust around the plant. And in 2017 and 2018, this DOE air monitor, 3.5 miles from PORTS, picked up Neptunium-237 and Americium-241, both byproducts of plutonium. But PORTS processed uranium. So where did those plutonium and plutonium-related particles come from? After nearly 2 years of digging through these government documents, I uncovered a surprising but likely source: Russia.
Russian-based fallout, it's in the community.
Jeff Walburn was a top-level anti-terrorism responder and security inspector at PORTS for 3 decades.
It was the worst of the worst.
To understand how Russian radioactive material ended up here, we have to rewind the clock back to November 9th, 1989. That's when the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed. As the world celebrated the end of the Cold War, a huge stockpile of Soviet nuclear warheads now threatened to be sold on the black market to dictators around the world. So, the U.S. developed a plan.
Congress got into a deal to bring Russian warheads.
That deal was a program called Swords to Plowshares, or Megatons to Megawatts. Under it, the U.S. bought thousands of Soviet warheads and converted them to enriched uranium to be processed into fuel for America's reactors. In 1994, the Russian radioactive material began arriving in America. And as this government map clearly shows, all of it was shipped to one destination for processing: the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant here in Ohio.
The Russian material was coming in.
Contaminated Russian material.
Which they knew.
They knew.
While top-level administrators at DOE and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, knew the details of the program, Dr. David Minuta, the chief scientist at PORTS from 1992 to 2000, who was supposed to sign off on what was being processed at PORTS, says he was never told.
You never knew Russian material was coming.
That is correct.
As a matter of fact, you just found out.
That is correct, sir.
How shocked are you by this?
I'm actually beyond shocked. I'm appalled.
For those in charge of the Swords to Plowshares program, questions about what Russia was sending began right away. In this transcript from a 1994 meeting of the NRC, the CEO of America's now privatized nuclear industry admitted initial testing of the Russian material revealed excess supplies of plutonium and other dangerous elements. 2 years later, in 1996, that same CEO indicated those issues had been resolved, telling the NRC everything they have delivered has been well within specification. But according to this 1999 GAO report, concerns about the Russian material ratcheted up. The report noting 1/3 of the shipments from 1995 to 1998 were not subject to transparency measures, meaning the shipments were not thoroughly examined. And the GAO added there was a deliberate decision by the U.S. government to have the radioactive material rapidly removed from Russia. As this graphic from that report reveals, from 1995 to 1998, 1,487 metric tons of enriched uranium were delivered from Russia to the U.S. That's the equivalent of 2,040 nuclear warheads. And all of it was delivered directly to ports before it shut down in 2001.
If you knew this was material from Russia, including plutonium, that was coming into your plant, what would you have done?
Would have asked them to stop, immediately stop.
That's because Dr. Minuta says Ports was not designed to handle plutonium. Yet, as the documents reveal, plutonium was in the Russian material and processed at Ports.
And it was deliberately kept away from me.
Does it all make sense to you now about the contamination in this area?
Well, it accounts for a lot of the contamination.
Dwayne Pullman, Local 12 News. On Google Earth, a massive nuclear complex comes into full view. This is Mayak. For 40 years, it was a secret site in the former Soviet Union, critical to building nuclear bombs.
I name myself daughter of Closet City.
Nadezhda Kudapova grew up in the shadow of Mayak, believing in Soviet propaganda. I talked to Nadezhda on Zoom from her home in Paris, where she's lived since 2015.
We created plutonium for nuclear bomb.
Nadezhda's patriotic view of the plant grew darker with time as she began to connect Mayak to contamination and cancer around her. Did you see cancer, death, everything related to this facility?
Yes, of course.
Dozens of nuclear accidents at Mayak have been well documented and confirmed by Russia, including a massive explosion in 1957 that irradiated thousands of square miles, making the area Nadezhda grew up in one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Nadezhda told me many of her relatives died from cancers and diseases, including her father, who she says worked at Mayak.
He suffered from the very hard cancer of stomach. It's very hard memories in my childhood.
Nadezhda says she tried to blow the whistle on Mayak, but was charged with espionage and forced to flee to France.
I was threatened by 20 years of prison.
If you're wondering why I'm focusing on a facility on the other side of the world, well, that's because Mayak is central to an American plan to dismantle Soviet nuclear warheads, convert them to enriched uranium, and ship that radioactive material here to the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant, or PORTS, in southern Ohio.
The Congress got into a deal to bring Russian warheads.
That deal was called Swords to Plowshares, or megatons to megawatts. U.S. government reports reveal thousands of tons of enriched uranium converted from those Russian warheads were shipped to ports throughout the 90s. Jeff Walburn, who is a top-level security inspector and anti-terrorism responder at ports, spent decades researching government documents and says the Russian radioactive material sent to ports was contaminated with dangerous impurities.
It was the worst of the worst.
And as this government map clearly shows, the road for those Russian radioactive shipments to ports leads back to 4 Russian sites, including Mayak.
This is the place where we got our stuff from?
That's who you got in bed with.
In this transcript from a 1994 meeting of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, the CEO of America's now privatized nuclear industry admitted initial testing of the Russian material revealed excess supplies of plutonium and other dangerous elements. In 1996, that same CEO told the NRC the Russians asked, "Would you mind if we gave out-of-spec material with plutonium in it?" The CEO assured the commission everything they have delivered has been well within specification. But 5 years after shipments began arriving to ports from Russia, the General Accounting Office, or GAO, issued this report stating 1/3 of the shipments from 1995 to 1998 were not subject to transparency measures. Around ports, plutonium and plutonium isotopes, which are far more dangerous than uranium, are now being picked up by government air monitors. And this independent study found plutonium isotopes in river sediment and dust collected from homes near the plant. When I told Nadezhda, that Russian political refugee, what we uncovered, she was stunned that America would ship anything from Mayak.
I have never heard that they transported the nuclear materials which could contaminate American soil. And for me, it's very surprising.
While Russia isn't the only source of dangerous elements at ports, it's clear shipments from Mayak and other former Soviet facilities did appear to include at least trace amounts of plutonium, which leads that former top-level security inspector and others to question whether contamination and cancer in American communities is connected to Russia.
Do you think Russia got the better of us?
Oh, they got the better of us.
Dwayne Pullman, Local 12 News.
Complete transparency, period.
Congressman Tim Ryan's demand for transparency led him to call for a meeting on Friday with Pike County leaders and the U.S. Department of Energy, or DOE, to, among other items, discuss serious questions raised in my investigation, fallout from Russia.
You know, it's first time you see it, it is shocking.
Over the past 3 weeks, I've laid out details of a U.S. program called Megatons to Megawatts, where thousands of former Soviet nuclear warheads were converted to uranium, and the radioactive material shipped to the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant, or PORTS, for processing. While the program was made public at the time, my investigation uncovered documents from the General Accounting Office, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and other sources that appear to indicate some of those Russian shipments were contaminated with at least trace amounts of plutonium, which is far more dangerous than uranium. DOE, which oversaw the program and regulates the plant, disputes my reports, stating in part, there is no evidence over the 20 years of safely implementing the program to substantiate the claim that plutonium of any amount that would be significant for public health and safety was part of these shipments.
How you doing?
But DOE has yet to agree to sit down for an interview with me to clarify its position.
Are you able to comment?
I caught up with Ike White, senior advisor for DOE's Office of Environmental Management, as he was leaving Friday's meeting.
So that was all uranium from Russia.
No plutonium.
No, it was uranium.
You never had plutonium.
Not that I'm aware of.
Government monitors around ports have picked up plutonium-related particles in the air, and an independent report identified plutonium isotopes in river sediment and from dust collected inside homes surrounding the plant. When asked if plutonium was present at ports, White would not answer.
Yes or no, did you ever have plutonium at the plant?
This plant was intended to process uranium.
I understand.
Yes,
That doesn't answer the question.
That
Didn't answer the question. Did you have plutonium?
While White walked away, internal documents I obtained from a former high-level security inspector and an OSHA investigator clearly show plutonium was present at ports while it was processing the Russian material. Samples gathered at ports in the mid-90s by an inspection team from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory were tested, revealing plutonium inside the plant in solid, liquid, and gas forms. In 1995, the laboratory issued this official Moody report, identifying and listing several forms of plutonium inside ports. And in this memo from 1998, an inventory list at ports notes plutonium is present inside the plant, including a 55-gallon drum containing both plutonium-238 and 239.
I'm glad it's getting coverage. I'm glad it's getting the attention.
Pike County Commissioner Jerry Miller is pleased I'm investigating. So is Health Commissioner Matt Brewster.
You're in our corner and we appreciate that. You know, all we want is the truth.
But truth surrounding this Cold War plant can be elusive, which is why Congressman Ryan says he's serious about getting real answers to the questions raised in my investigation.
And so I think we are now obligated to ask the Department of Energy to be completely transparent and release all the information that they have.
So you're making that request?
I'm making that request.
And if they don't comply, what do you do?
Well, we'll take it to the next step.
a step that could include an official congressional investigation. Dwayne Pullman, Local 12 News. Senator Manchin's visit here is about as big as it gets. He chairs the powerful Energy Committee, which oversees the U.S. Department of Energy, or DOE. And around here, most people don't trust the DOE, saying it's ignoring obvious signs of danger. So today, Senator Manchin joined Congressman Tim Ryan in a search not only for answers, but solutions. Dwayne Pullman with Channel 12. I'm Joe. Senator Joe Manchin joined Congressman Tim Ryan not at the now closed uranium processing plant, but here at Zons Corner, where this middle school closed more than 3 years ago when particles of enriched uranium were discovered inside. You realize how important your visit is here to Pike County. That's why I'm here. Children who attended Zons Corner and who lived near the plant died from rare cancers. My investigation exposed air monitors picking up radioactive particles around ports, including plutonium-related particles that could be connected to shipments from Russia. DOE insists there is no threat posed by the plant. Are you concerned about what you're hearing?
Absolutely. I come from the state of West Virginia, and I said my whole state's made up of Pike counties.
Senator Manchin took the controversy head on, saying he'll join Congressman Ryan to demand answers from DOE. You're in one of the most powerful positions to do something here.
Well, I'm chairman of the Energy Committee, so we have oversight of DOE. We have oversight of the nuclear program in the country. So there's answers to be had here.
That's good news for Pike County and for Ryan, who has ratcheted up his push for answers from DOE following my investigation.
We need answers, obviously, and having Senator Manchin here is a huge step for Southern Ohio.
For decades, people living in the shadow of the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant, or PORTS, have felt alone, facing growing evidence from the government's own data that this now closed Cold War plant that once processed uranium for America's nuclear bombs is spreading radiation.
It's a nightmare.
Causing cancer.
We've got, alarming cancer rates.
And death.
That was my best friend, and my son.
The U.S. Department of Energy, or DOE, which oversees ports, insists there is no threat posed by the plant. But over the past 2.5 years, my investigation uncovered children dying from rare cancers.
They took something special from me.
And air monitors around ports capturing dangerous radioactive particles. And an environmental radioactivity expert in Arizona confirming that ports is the source of the contamination.
Do you believe it spreads out much further than what it is?
It has to. It's obvious.
Plus, my investigation uncovered documents revealing Russian radioactive shipments to ports with at least trace amounts of plutonium.
It is shocking.
5 months ago, my investigation stunned Congressman Tim Ryan, who promised to ask tough questions.
Complete transparency, period.
This month, Representative Ryan made good on that promise, sending this letter to Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm, asking many of the same questions I've been asking of DOE for years. You're demanding answers.
Yeah, we want the Department of Energy to absolutely come clean.
Coming clean, the congressman says, means full disclosure.
And I am just not convinced that we have all the information that we need.
In his letter, Congressman Ryan, who sits on the House Energy and Water Development Committee, which oversees DOE, cites my on-air reports, referring to high cancer rates I exposed, as well as the deaths of Zach Farmer and Kate Smith that I focused on, from cancers that Ryan's letter points out can be induced by radiation. Plus, Ryan's letter cites reports from Dr. Michael Ketterer, who helped me prove the radioactive contamination is coming from ports. And Ryan's letter zeroes in on the megatons to megawatts program I highlighted, where 20,000 nuclear warheads from the former Soviet Union were processed into uranium and shipped to ports. My investigation uncovered documents proving those Russian shipments contained at least trace amounts of plutonium, which is far more deadly than uranium. In his letter, Ryan states, my reports raised serious questions related to the safety and security management of the megatons to megawatts program.
We know the uranium, but now It looks like plutonium, which is outrageous.
Wayne, good to see you. You as well. In May, when I tried to get answers from a senior advisor for DOE's Office of Environmental Management, he walked away.
Did you have plutonium? Did you have plutonium?
Congressman Ryan is not only asking tough questions, his letter is also demanding documents, including raw data and official reports of sampling and testing of Russian shipments of radioactive material shipped to ports. And notes, reports, and testing data cited in this report from the General Accounting Office, or GAO, about those Russian shipments. And the congressman is asking for declassification of a secret GAO report we could not see. Plus, Ryan's letter asks for raw data from all monitors around ports from 1994 to present. That includes data from this air monitor at Zahns Corner, which picked up plutonium-related particles and is across the street from a middle school closed after particles of enriched uranium were found inside.
To construct a new middle school.
While Ryan's letter was sent in the midst of his run for Senate, he insists his push for answers about radioactive contamination around ports and its connection to cancers rises above politics.
What do you say to those who might suggest that you're doing this for political reasons?
Go meet with the families. There's not a human being that could sit there and listen to what these families have gone through, and if you're in a position of power, not do everything you can to try to help them. You know, just because there's an election doesn't matter to me.
Do you expect to get complete answers?
I'm going to be like a dog with a bone on this thing. I'm going to get the answer, and that's my commitment to those families.
I asked for an interview with J.D. Vance, Representative Ryan's Republican opponent in the Senate race, to ask what he would do about what I've uncovered. He declined, but sent me this statement. Ohioans deserve the full truth of what's happened, including the extent of the environmental and health impacts on Ohio families and communities, he wrote, adding, as senator, I'll fight for answers, accountability, and action. By the way, a spokesperson for the Department of Energy tells me DOE will reply to Congressman Ryan's letter and will cooperate with his request. Of course, I'll let you know what happens next.